Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Searchcast. Today, my guest is Jessica Leonard, a senior SEO strategist at Two Barrels, and she's also a very active member in the Women of Tech SEO. Jessica, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So, I actually we got to talk at Brighton. We went to Brighton last year, didn't know each other. We got to meet at lunch, hang out with some other cool people, and those events are so awesome. But before we get into all of that, icebreaker question: which TV show character, movie show character would be a great or terrible SEO, and why?
That's a good one. I feel like Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec would be a terrible SEO. He he'd probably put off all of his work and or not do any of it. He'd be like, "Why do I care about Google?" And then go offline and never come back. So probably Ron Swanson. I
I
think that'd
just,
be my
as soon as you
go-to.
said Ron Swanson, I can just picture him in the circle desk, just spinning around when
Yes.
project managers are like, "Hey, Ron, I really need that report. I really need that content." He's just spinning around, avoiding it. That's
Mm-hmm.
amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Love that.
Yes.
So, Jessica, obviously, senior SEO strategist. How long have you been doing SEO?
So I've been doing SEO for 5 years now. I've been in digital marketing for 6 years. I started as a digital marketing account manager. So I was talking about SEO and like PPC long before I was actually practicing SEO, but SEO itself for 5 years.
So you were the person that Ron was avoiding,
Yes,
sitting in the chair.
exactly. Exactly.
What you know, what was the appeal to come to the other side of actually doing like the integrations, implementations, rather than just being the account facing side?
Yeah, so this one's kind of a funny story. I worked when I was doing account management. My company was acquired, and so they actually eliminated my account management position. And I was like, "Oh no, that's not good." So they gave me the option of doing a different sort of like customer service representative position, which was fine. But I kind of wanted to dig deeper into digital marketing at that point. So I was also able to apply for the SEO team. So I did that, and I got the position. And from there, I just started digging in. Uh, yeah, that's kind of where it started.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's so cool. I've been doing it for like, forever, 12, 13 years, and we didn't have SEO was, really, really not known what back then. But now there's so many different resources, Women in Tech SEO being one of them. It came onto the scene and just blossomed right away. The community took grasp, and there's just so many talented SEOs in that community. What are some other resources? Like when you first came in 5 years ago, how did you learn it? Was there any go-tos you would kind of reference or learn from?
So when I first started, I was lucky to have a really good trainer. So the initial
Nice.
on-page stuff, I was able to be taught, over meetings and stuff like that. But as far as like outside resources, newsletters were a really big one, or like email newsletters, getting
Sure.
those and finding the articles and seeing the names come up over and over again, like the people who are writing the articles, and getting to know familiar faces to who the authorities were in SEO really helped. And then I knew I could trust those sources. So I would come back in and I would be reading like the SEO FOMO newsletter,
Shout out.
and the Women in Tech SEO has a newsletter. Um, I know there's so many more out there right now, but I'm kind of like, I think Eli Schwartz has a
Yep.
newsletter and things like that. So there's a lot of really good newsletters out there that are constantly putting out updates. They're talking about where you can find more information. When there was the leak a couple days or a couple weeks back now, like my email inbox was just blowing up with those updates. So I think that newsletters and in general, just the community, like on LinkedIn, is really valuable as well. Same thing with the like finding the industry authorities, or like finding the people who can talk about SEO and like really know their stuff. You can get to trust their work, and you see them on LinkedIn and they're talking about it, and there's communication, and it's just a really strong community that loves to share information with each other. So getting involved with the community is definitely a really good way to be learning about SEO. You
I,
get to learn a lot secondhand that way.
I think there's a parallel there for sure. Google wants you to have provide helpful content, EEAT, and what you just described is kind of like that in real life, though, too, right? You want someone that's got the EAT that you're going to listen to and follow, and you do build that trust. So, shout out to everybody you mentioned. Eli Schwartz gets shouted out on this podcast all the time. I've never actually met him. If you ever want to come on, Eli, please, because you have a ton of fans, for sure. SEO FOMO, another shout out, great newsletter. SEO for Lunch, another great newsletter. So yeah, there's so
Yes.
many talented people, and I hope this podcast is more one of those kinds of things. Eventually, as a resource, just to provide helpful content. I really want to help people that are earlier in their SEO career, like or considering getting into SEO, make it a career. It's just SEO to me. If you want to, it doesn't require any set sort of like skill sets. People have diverse backgrounds. I talked to Brian Gorman on here, and he was a teacher, and he's a musician, right? So you wouldn't naturally think those things would play into the SEO community, but they play on it very well. So for you, did you go to school for marketing, or how did you find the first SEO account job even?
Yeah, so my initial start when I first started going to school, I was actually going to become an X-ray technician. I was like, yeah, medical field's where it's at. Like job security was where it's at. And I like took one medical terminology class and I was like, nope, not for me. Like I'm out. So I started taking marketing courses because it's not that I wanted something easy, but I was like, business is pretty general. I could go any direction with it. And so I started business probably like my second year, and it started to get more focused into marketing as time went on. And while I was still in school, that's when I got my account management position. So I actually finished school while I
Oh
was
wow.
working full time. I had been working full time before that as a barista anyway. So it was kind of like a balance. I went from making coffee to talking on the phone all day. So, whatever works. But that's, I got lucky when I was frustrated at my barista job, actually. This is how I got the job. And I went on a break and I went upstairs into the break room and I started like angrily applying to any job in marketing because I was like, this has got to be it. Like I need something that's not this. And I got a call back. I was actually surprised that I got a call back. And I went in and I had an interview, and honestly, the team was great, and I like really enjoyed the management there at the time. And yeah, they sent me an email and they're like, you got the position. I was like, whoa, that's great. And so there I was, and the rest is history, I guess, like it was a good time.
I think to the point we just made it, kind of like backgrounds are so diverse and how you get into it, but you having the brief experience being so client facing and customer service oriented, that's what account management is, right? If you're comfortable talking to people, and so yeah, again, you don't have to have a set background. I had a sales background before. I was selling motorcycles and cell phones and running shoes before I got into SEO, right? So if you want a career path that's like super dynamic and change, it's always changing. You're gonna have good job security. SEO is a career path for you. I would say if you're a person, and I'm gonna ask you the same question, but what kind of qualities does somebody need to have to enjoy SEO? And I think my number one would be you just have to be able to understand that there's no such thing as perfection. You're always going to be learning something. Just when you think you're like really good, Google will change something. So it's that constant evolution. So if you're like a person that likes puzzles that you can never solve, SEO is a great career path. What about you? What kind of traits would you say would fit a person looking to get into it?
So a long time ago, SEO was described to me as like chess. And then on the contrast, I was told that PPC is like checkers, but that's besides the point.
Shots
But
fired.
yeah, so I was like, yeah, like it being able to approach a puzzle and like be comfortable with challenge. And another thing that you really need to be comfortable with in SEO is failure. You really like you could do everything by the book. You can follow the Google helpful content guidelines to a T and still not perform as well as you would like. And I think that there's a lot to be said about being comfortable, not like trying new things and being okay with failing. I also think having like you don't have to like reinvent the wheel to like do certain things, but being creative and like not doing things the same exact way as everyone else, and being comfortable learning new ways to approach the same problem and seeing what sticks. You could throw it at it and see what really sticks and makes it grow. So I think that, yeah, I think SEO there's a lot of different attributes that could be helpful in SEO, but I think not being afraid of failing, or being okay with failure at least, and also being comfortable with trying new things is really important.
Yeah, um, I don't even look at it as a failure, right? Because you could talk to 10 different SEOs, and I can ask them, what are the three most important things to you, and I might get 30 different answers. And the only way you're going to figure out which way is the best is how the data plays out, right? So to your point, you can follow everything. Like, hey, I've done this methodology 100 different times; it's worked every time. And then there's gonna be that one time where it doesn't. And you're like, I don't know. I followed everything. It's so dynamic, and you just don't know. But they're learning opportunities though too. So SEO is so theoretical, right? Every time I onboard a new client, I talk about all the time like roles expectations go such a long way in retention, but it's so important, right? It's kind of like to your point, you don't. It's not rocket science. We're just reverse engineering. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. So it's just kind of saying, hey, look, we know that there's hundreds of different signals that Google's looking at. Well, now there's 1,400 apparently, according to the leak, right?
Is it 14,000? Something ridiculous.
Yeah. I say there's hundreds of signals though, right? We're just trying to send as many positive signals as we can, right? We have all these different tools available to us. We know what Google likes, right? Because that's where they're putting in the positions 1, 2, and 3. So we're just going to reverse engineer what they're doing, and we're going to try to do your website better. So if you can buy into that philosophy or that methodology, then hopefully, theoretically, you should have more success. So it's a super fun career in that sense. So if you're on the fence about it, happy to talk to you. It is super exciting. When it comes to SEO, though, it's oftentimes a black box, right? In the sense of businesses understand they need it, they've heard about it, but they don't understand what it is. What is your SEO elevator pitch? If you're at a mixer, maybe you're explaining it to your parents, right? Like they're like, "Hey, what do you do for a living? What is your SEO elevator pitch?"
So when I'm talking to someone who may not have a website, usually it's I help websites show up on Google, which is like the bare bones basics, but it really gets the point across, especially to like my parents. They get it, but they don't get it. Uh, but if I'm really talking to like a business owner or someone who has a website, who actually needs the help, I usually dive in a little bit deeper to making sure that the content is helpful, and making sure that the Google crawl bots can get through the website and actually crawl it and index it. Because if you have amazing content, but your site can't be read by Google or by the bots, I mean, it's not going anywhere. So I really like to dive in a little bit deeper if there's a reason to be helpful with it. But I think that talking about ways to make helpful, appreciative content so that way users want to come to the site, and then making sure that the site can be actually read by the search engines who are putting it out there.
Oh, that's an amazing. That's an amazing answer. I think I'm with you. I try to start very simple too. Just kind of like, hey, if you ever use Google, wondering how those websites get to the top positions, that's what I work on, right? Try to get websites to the top. I will say the best answer I've ever gotten in this. Shout out to JP Carpaccio. He's like, I tell people I dance with Google, and I was like, I love that. That's such a good way to put it, right? You're dancing with
Hmm.
Google, and it's a long dance, right?
Very long.
But it's a dance worth having for sure. When did you have your first like aha moment of like, hey, I'm actually good at this. Like this is my career. Like I made the right choice. I'm a player in this industry.
That's a good question. So, funny enough, my aha moment was probably while I was at Brighton SEO in San Diego this last year. I started the conference walking around talking to people, doing the networking thing. And as I'm talking to people, this is a multi-part, so bear with me.
Sure.
So the first part was I was walking around and realizing how much I knew compared to a lot of people who didn't know things. And it wasn't like this isn't like a humble brag, like, oh, I was so smart, but more of like I realized how far I had actually come with my knowledge, because some of them were where I had started, like they really did know, but they were still learning like the technical SEO state, like basics and things like that. And that's great. Like I was so glad to meet those people and like see that progress that I had made. But on the counterpoint, I saw how much further I had to go because there's the people who have the 10 plus years of experience doing SEO. And I was like, whoa, like this really could, like, this, I'm good at this and I should keep going. And it was a really cool moment. And also just like in general diving in and getting to listen to so many talented people speak and like get to know the community and like realize how much opportunity for growth in different ways. Like I could go any direction. I didn't have to like just sit there and be an SEO specialist, or I don't have to do just local SEO, or I don't have to do just this or just that. And it was a really fun experience to realize like how much opportunity there was, and then realize how how far I'd come and like how much farther I have to go. So it was a really humbling experience in a lot of ways, but I think that that was my aha moment, like, oh, like I do know what I'm doing, and I need to keep going. I need to keep learning. Now I have like this drive to get to know more.
I love that. Conferences are great for so many reasons, but to your point, just for validation too, right? You read all these articles and you're like, you start to read some of them, and you're like, okay, I understand where this is going. I can kind of predict the outcome of this article, and then you do that a lot of times. But then when you meet, at a good SEO conference, it can be super validating. So I totally love that answer. And conferences are just fun, like you said, the networking aspect. Just you never know who you're going to meet. That's how I met you. That's why we're having this conversation. And yeah, it's great. Are you going to any conferences this year?
Yeah, so I'll be going to the Women in Tech SEO in Philadelphia in September, and then I will be going to Brighton, San Diego again in, is that November? In November.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, embarrassing story for me. I thought MozCon was in August again. That's the one that I was like planning on going to for sure in Brighton, and then it happened in June, and I was like, oh my god, egg on face. That's so embarrassing. I even posted about it on LinkedIn. I was like, I'm a potato. That's horrible. And I heard the swag was better this year too, so I'm actually really jealous now.
What a bummer.
Yeah. But yeah, Brighton was great. I'm looking forward to it. For being year one in the US, it was a great turnout. It was incredible. So
Yeah.
that's really fun. Have you been to the Women in Tech SEO conference before?
I haven't. This will be my first. I am really excited to go and meet all of these people that I'm always reading about and like seeing their face on the newsletters and things like that, and like getting to put, a person to the reading and stuff like that will be really fun.
Absolutely. And you know what I love about the SEO community in general is, you see these people on the stage, right? And it's like so intimidating. Like I'm like basically a fanboy, right? Like I read all their newsletters, I read all their posts, I follow them, I listen to them talk. But if you go approach them after, like they're like the nicest people. They're like so humble and approachable. So if you go to a conference, let the person know they appreciate it, because again, it's all about that EEAT, and they're the best of the best, but they're also so cool, so inclusive, and yeah, conferences are amazing for so many ways.
Hmm.
So you've been in the game for 5 years now. You have a very sturdy footing in the industry. How has SEO changed in that time?
I feel like this is a loaded question. So,
It is.
when I first started, I remember sitting, like, getting called into a conference room, and we had a Google rep come in, and he was pitching us something, I'm sure. And we were talking a lot about voice search and like how to optimize for voice search. And I think that that was the first time that I had learned about like schema markup and like semantics and things like that. And since then, I feel like we have taken voice search and then we, times 100, like voice search is AI, but it's not, but it is. And so I feel like it was really like the stepping stone to learning how AI works and learning about. I keep calling it SGE, Search Generative Experience, but they changed the name. So now it's like AI or IO for Google. And like, I feel like just watching the evolution of AI and the evolution of LLMs over the last 5 years in not just Google, but like in the internet as on the internet as a whole. And it's changed a lot, but also like the basics are still there. Like you still want to have that good on-page optimization and stuff like that. So I think that SEO has evolved quite a bit in the last 5 years, especially with the last handful of algorithm updates, especially in the last 2 years, I'd say.
Oh yeah.
Uh, but it's been quite a whirlwind. I can't imagine, 10 plus years seeing the evolution from, white keywords where you can't see them in the background all the way up.
Oh yeah, SEO back in the day was much simpler, right? Like everybody could get number one rankings as long as you had the money for it. Yeah, I agree with you, and especially in the last few years, the algorithms have been crazy volatile. It used to be like it used to, you could take it was like death taxes and two Google algorithms a year. You could kind of count on that, right? Two broad cores, and then just in the last month, we've had like what two broad cores and helpful content, So it's like, oh my god, that's crazy. Even Google's acknowledging them, where before it was like you're looking at the SEMrush sensor and the Mozcast and Algoru and Rank Ranger, you're like, that's a lot of volatility, but Google's like, oh, nothing's happening over here, right? It's like I don't know about that, but yeah, and then this Google leak was crazy. 1,400 signals apparently got leaked. Google acknowledged that too, like yeah, it's legit. Did you have a chance to like research any of that at all?
I did dig in a little bit. I feel like there's definitely a lot of people out there who are much more knowledgeable about it than I am, but I did. I
Shout out to
was I
Michael
was
King.
yeah, I was reading his articles, and I was reading Barry
Barry
Schwartz.
Schwartz. Yep.
Yes, reading his stuff when it came out, and I think Lydia Solis. I
Yep.
think she put out it's a Google Doc that has like a list of related articles about it, and also tools now that have started to come out. Like where the SEO industry moves so fast, we're like
Yeah.
jump on that train and go. So there's definitely a lot of really good resources out there to dig into, and I have dug in a little bit. I
What are some of your top takeaways from it?
Ah, that we should continue to understand that Google is a business trying to make money, and that uh, SEOs have this tendency to find what works for them and then decide that that is a rule. And so things like title tag length or like metadata length and stuff like that that may or may not have been a rule in place for the length is now like, oh, maybe that wasn't as important as we thought it was. Like, how much time did we spend making sure that the meta titles were short enough, And there's a lot of other things like that that are interesting that have come out, but then there's a lot of things that like reaffirmed what we kind of already knew. I think that we I think that there's still a lot of digging to do into it. There's a lot of testing to be done to like see what is true and what was just kind of leaked, because I don't know if we know for certain which aspects of this leak are still up to date versus which aspects are still what's still being used versus what was being used and is just in that data file. Like, do developers really clean up all their code, or do they just kind of like kill it a little bit?
No, I think that's spot on. I got to do a little bit of research on it too. I think it was really self validating for me in a lot of ways too, where stuff that we've been practicing for several years, and it just kind of like I knew it. I knew that
Mm-hmm.
click through rate was important. I knew that user engagement was important. I knew that refreshing content was important, right? So as much as SEO has changed in the last 5 years or 13 years or whatever it is, it's also stayed the same in a lot of ways, right? If you're a fringe SEO, what I call like a nice way of saying if you're black hat, yeah, that was probably a revolution for you, right? Where it's like, your sites are struggling. But if you've been doing white hat SEO for a long time and you're focused on the user search journey and filling in the, from the top of the funnel all the way down to the bottom with really helpful content, answering questions directly, showing good visuals, I don't think it changed a ton, but it was validating that some of the stuff that Google has been adamant about that aren't signals, like engagement rate, for example, and click through. That was definitely validating. So, yeah, that was super interesting. Shout out to Michael King and Rand Fishkin and everybody that had those great resources out there. It's super fun, right? It was maybe not as fun as the right around Brighton, the what do they call it? Gators.
Yeah.
Well, I don't remember.
The ones who we ruined the internet or something like that, or SEO
Yeah.
is dead, we ruined the internet, the usual,
Oh man,
annual, oh no.
I forgot what they call this, like something Gators. But that guy at Brighton that was walking around in the Gator costume, that was hilarious. That was 200
Yes.
IQ move for sure.
Hmm. Definitely.
What kind of advice, if you took a minute to reflect, what kind of advice would you give your younger self now that you have all this knowledge? If you could go back in time.
That's a good question. I think that it might delve a little bit more into the type of work environment and a little bit more into the culture and a little bit less into SEO. Making sure that you work for a company where you feel appreciated and making sure that you're not killing your work life balance too much, making sure you're working, 40 hours and understanding that it's marketing. And while you should take your job seriously and do a good job, it's not life or death. And, your mental health is not worth sacrificing in order to get a paycheck. There's so many. I know it's not as cut and dry as just leaving a job, but like there's so many opportunities out there. And if you're breaking your back for a company that thinks you're a number, it's not worth it. You really should try to move on as soon as possible because your mental health is much more valuable than that.
Golf clap to that one. Golf clap to that one. The show Undercover Boss. I'm not sure if you ever watched it, but it was like one of my favorite shows for many years. But the CEO of TaylorMade Golf and Adidas Golf, he was on it, and he played golf every day at 5 p.m. and people would be like, you're a CEO of this multi-million-dollar company. How can you do this? And he had a great quote. I'm paraphrasing, but it was essentially like, if you can't do your job in 40 hours, the job's too big for you. Then I love that, right? So I've definitely been guilty of working a lot more than that. To your point, at some of these previous jobs where you are just literally killing yourself with just mentally, right? And it spills into your physical, right? Stress, you gain weight, you're just not happy. You wake up, you go to work, you eat dinner, you go to bed. Wait, it's a brutal cycle. So culture is so important. Looking back on it, it sucks you had to live through that. I think that's part of everybody's kind of career path, unfortunately, right? I think it's getting better over time. Now that agencies are a lot more established, companies are a lot more established, they have SEO departments and leaders, and there's a lot more training, and just it's a lot more known entity now, although still not super well known. Um, if you could go back in time, like what kind of or even not, what kind of advice would you give people looking that are interviewing at places for an SEO job? What kind of questions should they be asking about culture to maybe get like some foresight about what they're going to get themselves into?
That's a good question as well. I think asking about management style is important. Um, what's the workflow look like? Is it monthly and you're doing reports at the beginning of the month, or do they do sprints? Are they on the Scrum, like bi-weekly or so, rotating schedule? There's a lot of different work styles that work for different people, and making sure
Sure.
that you're aligned with that. Excuse me.
Mhm.
And then also making sure that you are asking about the team itself. If it's a small team, you can get a little bit more insight usually in an interview like that. But if it's a large team, it's harder to do. But seeing what kind of people already exist on the team, and you can't always get away with it, but sometimes asking about like, how often do people stay on this team? Are they leaving after a year? Are they leaving after 6 months? Or has the team been around for 6 years and you only bring on new people every once in a while and the last person who left retired, kind of thing? And you're not necessarily going to get super lucky all the time finding a team that's well established and has been around for a long time with very low churn, but when you can get lucky, it's really worth it.
Yeah, those are great questions, for sure. Especially, I ask the same thing. I would encourage people to ask the same thing. Kind of like, what's the team structure? What does my day to day look like? And then what's the culture is super hard to define, right? Some people think it's like having a ping pong table or an Xbox and a beer tap, right? Which are all great things, but at the end of the day, it's about your 9 to 5, right? Like, what does that kind of look like? So, great question about what's the churn rate or what's the turnover rate. Why is this position open? Is it a backfill or just like a new position? Is a great one. Then it kind of like, what's the career path for me, right? So, I'm starting as an intern or an SEO specialist or whatever. What does success look like for me 6 months from now, 1 year from now, and how are you going to help me get there, right? Am I going to have a mentor? Am I part of is it a one person team? Is it my, part of a larger team? What are we focused on? What is my role focused on? So understand the overall outcome of SEO is we want more traffic, more leads, more revenue, etc. How do I contribute to that, and how would you judge success on there? You don't have a lot of control over the interview process and who you're interviewing, but I always try to make sure that I interview with the person that's going to be managing or directing me. I want to make sure that I get along with them, right? So for me, one thing I look for is when I do the interview, if it's a 30-minute one or an hour one, at the end of that, did we have more to talk about, or was that conversation kind of dead? Right? If it's kind of like the last 5 minutes were dragging out and like this conversation was over, maybe that's a sign for me where I'm like, I don't know if I could work with this person like long term. But if it's like, oh no, we hit the 30 minutes, we rolled into 45 minutes or an hour because we just had a really good connection and we were talking about even stuff that wasn't SEO related, right? I think that for me maybe it's more intuitive than like an actual data point, but I think it's super important. So trust your instinct, right? Everybody has intuition, and set yourself up for that. But yeah, love the turnover question, the churn question, and then just the kind of the career path. The other one you can ask too, it's a little more direct, but it's more like, so the person in this role before me, were they promoted? How long were they there, right? That kind of a thing. And then, your own research on, Indeed, for example, look at those reviews. But the other part too that I ask is, you know, leadership. What is their belief in SEO? I want to work for a company that understands SEO as like a backbone of their business, and they're going to support the initiatives. I've been in roles where SEO was, a bigger team and it was important, but upper management didn't understand the importance, so we didn't get the funding or the tools. We were playing, behind the eight ball, so to speak, kind of like the whole time. Another good question would be kind of like, for me, I worked 1 year at a job where we did amazing deliverables. The team itself was incredible. Our methodologies were incredible. Not a single thing got implemented on a site in a year, and that's just degrading because the whole goal of an SEO is, we talked about it before. It's like a never-ending puzzle, and you want to see the fruits of your labor, right? So, if you have this awesome strategy and then you never get to implement it, you don't know if it worked or not, right? So, hopefully, those are some helpful tips. Anything else to add to that?
I feel like you really hit the nail on the head there, making sure that I think the conversation point, or the being able to hold a conversation with them, is a really important aspect. Like, could you work with this person in a room for 8 hours a day and not be frustrated by the end of the day? And it's not that you have to be able to chat them up or like have so many hobbies in common or anything
Right.
like that, but just like, are they a good person? And like, do you enjoy talking to them? And are they fun enough in your perspective? Like, do they meet that that desired uh, communication style? Definitely. I
And
agree with
then,
that point a lot.
yeah, and then to your point earlier, a great point about leadership styles. Nobody probably likes to be micromanaged for sure, right? And probably micromanagers aren't self-aware enough that they do micromanage. But I always ask, kind of like, can you give me an example of your leadership style? So you can assign me a project. How do you manage that? How do you manage me in that project? Simultaneously. And I like to hear how they respond to that, and you can kind of tell if they're authentic or not, right? If you feel like their answer is kind of like what you want to hear versus what they actually are, it's kind of intuition, but it's kind of like, it might be a red flag. And to your point earlier, SEO jobs are popping up all over the place. Last year there was like a 36% increase in demand for SEOs. SEO salaries were up across the board. And I think, end of this year is going to be kind of similar. So, I know it's like sometimes you just want to get out of a current situation or you just want to get your foot in the door. But you are a human being, you shouldn't settle for anything, right? If they're going to push you to be the best, you need to surround yourself kind of with the best. So, um, totally love that. All right, so let's talk about some actionable SEO items right now. So I know for you, you are in a unique spot where you do a lot of B2B SEO, correct?
Yes.
So that's a very specific niche. What are some actionable tips for like B2B SEO? Like, where does your strategy start?
So I think a big part of my strategy, if we're talking like beyond technical, the usual,
Yeah,
can the site be crawled? Can the site be
yeah,
indexed? And all that really important stuff. Because I run into that more often than I should. Also, starting with like search intent and not necessarily optimizing a page for search engines, but more optimizing it for users. You know, you want to focus on the users who are coming in off of the search engine. Because if you are just optimizing for an algorithm, you're going to leave a lot lacking as far as user experience goes. So, starting with making sure you understand what your user intent is and asking the questions about what are they looking for? What's the problem that brought them here? How can I help them with that problem? And making sure that, when you're matching informational intent versus commercial intent and not having too much of a pitchy page if you're trying to give information, things like that at the higher level, at the top of the funnel, and then focusing it in and getting them into a converting page afterwards. So I think that as far as an actionable tip, understanding your user's intent and understanding the item or product or service that you're selling and asking yourself questions about the product itself so that way you can fully understand it. So, approaching it like a product manager, you can understand your audience and your user better, and then you can understand their intent better, and then it just, waterfalls from there. So, I think that that would be the biggest takeaway or the biggest thing that I would like to share is making sure that you truly understand what your users are looking for and focus on the user itself and focus on being helpful and the product and understanding why the user needs the product over optimizing for just a keyword and trying to drive the algorithm point to, you really, really, really need to focus on a user and user experience.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And B2B SEO is such an interesting niche in the SEO world, because a lot of times SEO has to really not be a standalone product. It's like supporting many other channels of marketing. So to your point, answering the pain points for sure. It's not uncommon. I'm not saying this is what you guys do, but it's not uncommon for SEO and B2B to be a lot more focused on the upper and mid funnel versus the bottom, just because you're not searching for consumers. It's more like people don't even know your product exists, but they're looking for that solution. So how do you cast a net that's wide enough yet focused enough to try to find those personas? So I'm sure persona matching is absolutely crucial for what you do. How often do you guys create or edit your kind of personas for in the B2B space?
I think it depends on what kind of product we're looking at. I think that it gets updated. I'd probably say I try to dig into that sort of data every 6 months or so to see if it's
Smart.
changed at all. And sometimes there's not really a lot of change. And sometimes, during the busier season, we'll see a fluctuation in certain aspects of it. But for the most part, I'd say every 6 months or so, I'm trying to make sure that I understand who the user is and that the user is the same user that it was 6 months ago. And sometimes it's not, and sometimes it is, but for the most part, it follows a pretty steady path for the type of products that I work on. So that's helpful for me at least.
No, that's such a beautiful answer. And, the fact that you can answer a question like that is the whole reason why I'm not afraid of SEO AI for the SEO industry, because in the day, it's going to be people like yourself that, are going to have forever job security because you're a true strategist. You're not, you're not like just a updated title tag, updated meta description, 55 characters, 145 characters, image alt text, 3 words, that is what AI can replace. The AI can replace repeatable black and white, tasks, repetitive tasks. But SEO people like yourself that are actual strategists are going to have an amazing career, and that the world is our oyster, so to speak. So I just wanted to give you props on that, Jessica. Amazing answer on that. What other tips do you have that kind of like help you stand out as a strategist versus like someone that's more replaceable, like by an AI software tool in the future?
Ooh, that's a good one too. So I think something that stands out about strategy in general is making sure that not only are you aligning your SEO goals with the business's goals and product goals, but also you're aligning it with, the user's needs and the algorithm. And so there's like a lot of different facets feeding into the same tasks, if you will. And so trying to make sure that you are covering all of your bases at the same time, and it involves a lot of communication with the product teams and a lot of communication with the developers and the content teams. And so being able to communicate and make sure that SEO is being advocated for and that it is a focus when it comes time, especially for like online companies that are based online. It's a lot harder to put SEO on the back burner. And so everyone on the team needs to understand the importance of it, but also SEO can't let their ego get too big. They need to understand that like the business's goals are top priority, and matching those business goals and communicating the needs of SEO with the other teams is a really important way to strategize, because I can only do so much, but with my amazing developers and my amazing content team, we can make something really great. And so strategy is an overarching picture of making sure that everything works together seamlessly and that the pieces of the puzzle all fall into place, rather than, it's on page optimization is important, but it's a piece of the larger puzzle.
That answer is so spot on, and I just want to give you a little more props here. I've been doing this for a long time. I've interviewed a lot of people, promoted a lot of people, and the biggest difference, in my opinion, in general, between like the next jump from a specialist to manager, or it's actually usually manager to director, to be honest, is the communication aspect. So as SEOs, we live on our own bubble sometimes, where we're just super deep into Screaming Frog or Deep Crawl or whatever the SEO tools you're using, the technical side. But you have to communicate that to the broader teams, to the product team, to the content team, etc. And the best SEOs, the ones that get promoted and ascend the ladder the quickest, are the ones that can communicate to those teams really well, because that really builds your strategy. SEO is not impactful unless it gets implemented. So the best thing you can do as an SEO is be able to communicate and relay that information. So I think your background in the account management side probably really benefits you in this phase of your career. But I think you're like one step ahead, right? You're talking like at least a manager level experience there, and then the next thing from a manager to director. The only thing that's different, a director doesn't mean that they're the best at every aspect of SEO. Doesn't mean they're the best technical, the best content, the best offsite, the best digital PR. It's really the person that can drive value to the audience that they're speaking to, right? So at the director level, oftentimes you're talking to the CMO, the board of directors, VPs, CEOs, etc. They don't care about Screaming Frog. They don't know what that is. They think it's a funny word. They run their business off of a P&L, right? Just profit and loss, ROI, ROAS. Is your channel performing? If not, why not? If so, what can we do more of? And if we give you this budget, how does it impact us? So the fact that you are so good at communicating across broader teams, man, the future is so bright. I'm so excited for you. But I just wanted to share that with you because that's a spot on answer. And that is something that AI will never be able to replicate. AI will be able to say like, hey, SEMrush has a really cool beta feature. I'm not sure if you played with the reporting and all, but it'll summarize. If you connect GA4 and GBP, it'll actually spit out, a really good summary of like the data points, which is cool. But again, when you're talking to those broader teams, those metrics aren't that important. It's about you being able to relay the information so that they can absorb it. They have actionable tips leaving that meeting on what to expect from the SEO side. And then once you deliver on that, you're sitting pretty. So again, kudos to you, Jessica. Awesome answer.
Thank you.
And as we're wrapping this up, how can people find you? How can they connect with you?
Oh, yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. It is my first last name. Jessica is Jesika. It's a little funky, so it's a little bit harder to find me than some people, but it's not always a bad thing. And that's probably the best place to connect with me about work stuff. So definitely feel free to reach out and ask any questions. And I just yeah.
Any shout outs you want to give?
Ooh. I feel like I could give so many shout outs. There's a lot of people that I look up to in the SEO industry that I really appreciate their work. I really appreciate like Arij from Women in Tech SEO and Lydia Solis from SEO FOMO and so much more than that. Anyone who helps make the SEO industry more of a community than just, cut and dry business that you just show up and do your job. Those are the people who really make working in SEO fun and entertaining. So shout out to those people who do a great job with that.
Absolutely. And if people want to work with you, what kind of yeah, for two barrels, like what's the ideal kind of client that you guys would like consider working with?
Yeah, so we typically help with like business formation services, and we also help with like website services. So you can typically find, uh, I think business formation is our main client focus, and as well as websites, domains, things like that. Definitely worth looking into.
Awesome, Jessica. Thanks again so much for the time. I know it's your birthday weekend. Happy early birthday. Hope you
Thank you.
celebrate in a way that's great for your mental health. And just know that you are a shining star in the SEO industry, and I'm so excited to follow your career path.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.